Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Craft of the Cards. This is a series fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of their art, how it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card's name. We work through the archetypes in alphabetical order, started at a random point, which in this case was you. But before we go on today, I do have a question to ask you, my lovely subscribers. I honestly am starting to feel the limitations of this strict alphabetical format. While originally when I started the series I thought that it would be a great way to give myself an easy way of deciding which archetype I'd like to do next, at some point it starts getting to a point where I really want to cover some archetypes, mostly just for the interestingness of their artwork, or maybe I just want to rip into them for whatever reason. I was wondering then if y'all would be okay with me taking it off the alphabetical slant, because it allows me to firstly respond better to more of your requests, and B, helps to keep my interest alive instead of having to trudge past archetypes I'd rather not cover for whatever reason. So, if you'd have any particular thoughts on the matter, please do leave them in the comment section below. Moving on back to the review, we grade the cards out of 10, with 10 being an excellent card in both theming and effect, and 1 being a waste of cardboard and man-hours. The archetype this time is weird though. Really weird. 5Ds was weird in general for Yu-Gi-Oh! They were the awkward teenage years the TV series so much wanted to capitalize on, and it seemed unable to decide what it wanted to do with itself. It had figured out how to make archetypes by the end of GX, and had established a hilariously edgy art style to match. 5Ds was a period of exploration for them, transitioning between very anime-esque designs and much more realistic ones. From this awkward soup came the archetype we're looking at today, Wots. They hold several archetypal through lines. They are generally named after a monster of some sort, with their synchro monsters being mythical ones, and they have a very interesting color scheme and a really cool art style, with it resembling much more Western cartoons than anything overtly anime-ish or realistic. However, they have several issues that cross the entire archetypes, the backgrounds being the most egregious, being the exact damn same for every single card, which is a staggering lack of effort on the part of Konami. This is a really interesting archetype, and probably the first one where I'm not at least somewhat of a fan of the artwork. So, without further ado, now that I've nattered on long enough, let's take a deep dive into Wots. Their first monster, Wat Hopper, barring the background, is pretty nice. I like the colors of the cards. They blend the varying shades of blue and green very well to create a colorful and interesting monster. I like the electricity crackling from the monster. It gives it a nice mechanical edge which seems to communicate its inorganic nature, and the feet being slightly different colors gives it a bit of flair there as well, helping to break up the color scheme and make it pop a bit more. The effect is pretty lackluster though, not really matching the card in both name or effect, and in the end, it's a good design for a monster, but a lack of good background and an effect means that this can't honestly get more than a 4 out of 10. The next monster is a tuner, Wat Beta, based on the Siamese or Beta fighting fish. Before we go on, a quick note on the names. They're uncreative as hell. They could have found many more interesting ways to describe these than just putting Wat in front of the name that the animal is named after, so in any case, the design is once again very good. I like that we can see the seams in its head showing its mechanical nature, and it manages to capture the most distinctive element of the fighting fish, the tail, rather well, flowing behind it. The other visual effects are fine, the bubbles and lightning both showing off the natures of the card, with it being a thunder type as well as looking like a fish. The effect is actually fairly thematic this time, its battle-related nature making a lot of sense for the monster that it's based off of being a fighting fish. I would have liked to see higher attack values in this case, considering that it is a fairly piddly 100 attack, but I can see why they might not have wanted to give level 2 such a high attack, especially given the effects of later cards which allow things like this to attack directly. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. While it normally would get a higher grade, the lack of a good background, as is similar for all the monsters, brings it down somewhat. Wat Fox, their next card, has a very interesting design. It's one of the most overtly mechanical of all the monsters, the lack of eyes and circuit patterns on the ears and tip of the tail giving it a very machine-like appearance. The hands are interesting as well, being very reminiscent of Wot Kid, a card which was released all the way back in 2005. I like the design, it's the most cute out of all of them as well. The stylized eyes and cute hands go along with a little scarf on its neck to help lend to a very innocent expression. It's a simple card, the body and the tail merging into one giant crescent, and the head being a collection of simple shapes. It's a really nice effect as well, stunning the opponent out of doing a bunch of things when destroyed by battle. It makes a lot of sense given their place as thunder monsters, so in the end, this card gets a 6 out of 10, a pretty nice card barring the generic background with a really nice effect, and the design works very well to communicate a very innocent and almost childlike sort of design. Next up, we have Wot Lemur, clearly based on a lemur, the type of animal endemic to the island of Madagascar, and most commonly represented in pop culture by this furry anus of a character. Beyond that, the design for this card is once again pretty nice. The colors are good, the white and blue are nicely contrasted against each other, and I like how the tail is emphasized, curving around the back of the card down to the front. The red parts around the tops of the arms and the dual-colored eyes all help to break up the card as well, adding some more interesting elements to the art. The transparent parts showing the wiring inside is really cool, and I like how brightly colored they are. The effect is once again pretty nice, with it making thematic sense as a stun effect due to its thunder typing. Another 6 out of 10. In the end, a really nice card brought down by a lackluster background. Their next card is Wot Dragonfly, and like the others, it's fine enough, with its name being referenced in Japanese to the yellow darter dragonfly, which this pays homage to, with the yellow stripes and the stars in the eyes end up matching its level. It's a really cool design, actually, and I like the small nods to its original animal that they decided to include in the art. I like how they took the usual tracery of lines on the wings of the dragonfly and converted it into circuit lines this time. It's a subtle but effective way to evoke machinery and show off its mechanical nature. The effect actually works pretty well this time as well, allowing it to ferry a monster out of your deck when destroyed, maybe flying it out, as if I had to posit some sort of animation or method to its madness. In the end, it can't get more than a 4 out of 10 though. Fine enough without anything to differentiate it, but like any other card, suffers from a terrible background. So, moving on to our next card, it's... What the hell is that noise? Oh boy! So yeah, it's Wotmole, a walking lawsuit considering its similarity to Buta from Gurren Lagann, and while you would think that my residual fondness for that series would bump this up to a higher grade, they are sorely mistaken. While the background for most of the cards isn't exactly great, it really grinds my gears here. While the others were bland but still functional, this one actively harms the card. The card is drawn like it's pulling itself out of the ground, with one leg posed towards the bottom like it's planning on heaving itself the rest of the way out, and the dirt piled up behind it. Problem is, instead of just drawing a damn background that would have made sense, they just cut it off at need the most embarrassingly way possible. The rest of the design is fine enough, with the digging equipment matching well with the effect, which is to destroy face-down defense monsters, and the electricity combines very well with the sunglasses to make it seem like a real cool dude, as it were. The effect, as I mentioned briefly before, syncs up quite well with the design and the name, making sense when combining the actual habits of a mole with the general trend of Konami liking to use digging imagery for things that will destroy face-down monsters. In the end though, this gets a 3 out of 10. While the design is nice enough, the background is especially offensive this time, and cannot be excused when accounting for this final grade. I honestly have to wonder why the next card exists. Honestly, Wot Barracks is almost always worse than Wot Beta, while sharing many elements of the same design and an extremely similar effect. The thing is, this lacks originality in any respect, and a clear link between the effect and its damn name. It's named after the Barracks, a genus of fish most commonly associated with a red bream, whose only noticeable quality, aside from tasting nice, is being remarkably long-lived. This card is lazy above everything else, sharing far too many elements with Beta for my liking, the orange coloration, the seams showing its mechanical nature, and therefore gets a 2 out of 10. This card is disappointing, and I despise the lack of originality that goes out into crapping out of cards like this. I mean, they couldn't even have tried to make it seem more red than orange, or given it some or any elements that would differentiate it from Wot Beta. This is just terrible. What the hell is this? I mean, actually, what the hell is this? Well, apparently it's Wot Kiwi, a monster whose ass is staring at me. Okay, well, let's try and keep going. Wot Kiwi is an interestingly designed card who wants me to stare at the star on its anus as much as possible. It's interesting that they chose to make its entire body an electrical appliance this time, as previously they seemed to want to make animals just look like mechanically electrified version of themselves, but in this case have chosen to make this an electrical appliance with a head grotesquely screwed on. This is a really goofy look and a pretty big departure from the norm of these monsters, and honestly, I'm not too enthused about it. While the archetype is more colorful and goofy than others, this card really suffers from being a bit too out there and too weird. Instead of a regular body with some more colorful elements like shows up on a lot of the other monsters, it gives itself entirely over to the strangeness of the concept, and the red starburst really doesn't help that. It draws the eye so obviously towards its ass that I can't imagine how you would stare at anything else. The effect also really isn't related to anything the card might plausibly do, and the background is once again pretty disappointing. In the end, it gets a 4 out of 10, saved from the lower score by the sheer absurdity with the art, which I can respect to a certain degree though. I do have to say that it's kind of hilarious that Australia gets Ayers Rock Sunrise and Master of Oz for cards, but all New Zealand gets is this thing. Their next card, and much more conventionally drawn, is Wot Squirrel. I like a lot of the elements about this card, aside from the purple gem on his forehead. It looks cute, and the bright red coat helps to give it a lot of personality, with a gradient on its ears and tails fading into a very nice shade of blue. I like it a lot, and I like the screws marching down its stomach as well, helping to show off how mechanical it is, and I also love the fact that he's nibbling on a little lightning bolt colored pellet. And the pale blue chevrons on his arms and earpieces also add a nice bit of color and help to make the ears stand out a lot more. He's a cute little bastard, and the effect ain't too bad either, playing on the hyperactive nature of squirrels, along with the fact that it's a thunder monster and therefore charged with electricity. Just assume from here on out that the background will be a disappointment, and we'll give this card a 5 out of 10. The effect doesn't have the strongest link to its status as a squirrel, but the art is really nice, so it gets an average grade from me. They managed to do a lot of things well to make this card seem very, very cute, which helps it a lot in my opinion. Moving on to our next card, we gotta first address the fact that Woodpecker is their most awkwardly named card. Well, it really doesn't have a good portmanteau that is again unfortunately phallic. The design is once again really nice, with the entire card based around the pattern of lightning bolts and the motion of him whacking at the concrete. I like the design of the lightning bolts, how it's mirrored on the wings and on the black coat, and that, along with the circuit lines on the belly, all help to show how mechanical it is, and the bulging eyes show up well on the white background, especially ringed with black to help them provide more contrast. The red crest helps as well and adds a good level of color to the card. The big element of the card though is its beak and the massive electric bolt that it seems to be channeling down into the concrete. I love the visual effects. It looks like a lightning bolt, and the ragged edges help to lend it a sense of power. The concrete is actually pretty well designed as well, with it cracking visually under the strain. And I like that it's concrete rather than wood to help show its more inorganic nature. The effect is a little weird this time, it being a battle-focused one, with my thoughts that it would be lent towards a destruction effect, a massive beak and lightning bolt tending to draw my thoughts that way. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. It's not a great card, but the design does focus well around a solidly executed concept, even if the effect and backgrounds are both lacking, so it gets an average grade. The next card, Wot Cobra, once again has a really nice design, with the card being based on a king cobra having a cute little crown on top to help. I also like how we can see the exposed core in the middle, with breaks in the skin to show the wires running throughout the body. I also like how the hood is decorated with lightning bolts, with the tongue even being one as well, darting out at the viewer, with crackling lightning over the other parts of body. It helps to give it a real sense of theme, and I especially like the use of color on this one, with red and pale blue flowing and contrasting so well to each other, while the yellow breaks it up a bit more and the slight blue tinge to help it blend with the background. The effect is good. I like how it can attack directly, representing the sneaky, shifty nature that snakes are so often attributed. It's a good card and gets a 6 out of 10. Once again, solidly designed around a core theme, but this time with an effect that helps to bring it up from an average 5 out of 10. I'm honestly not sure how to feel about Wot Pheasant, mostly because pheasants don't really fly that much. While they can, they almost always prefer to run, and therefore the pose of this card, where it seems to be going after something like an eagle or a falcon, makes little to no sense, and my question is why they just didn't decide to name something like Eagle or Wot Falcon. I can only assume, like sensible people, that they really like the look of the tail feather of the pheasant, which is displayed with a lot of flair on the card itself. It does help the card a lot, giving it a larger profile and therefore much more presence. The wings above its head help to draw the eyes to the golden tips, and the bright red surrounding the face helps the eyes there as well. This probably is the most the most aesthetic of the cards, and I can go somewhat behind that effect, the fact that it has wings to carry itself over the cards, allowing it to attack directly. I also like the second effect, the one that allows you to banish an opponent's monster if it does attack directly. I like to imagine that the card is carrying it off into the sky. In the end, it gets a 6 out of 10. A well-designed card with a good color scheme and a nice effect, brought down by a mediocre background. Wot Giraffe is their last main deck monster, and is also pretty cute. The exaggerated eyes and the fact that he seems to be leaning down to stare at the viewer helps, and the light bulbs that have replaced his ears also lend it an air of goofiness that makes it seem much more innocent. There's really not much more to say about it. The colors are nice and bright, and the red goes well with the yellow and orange. I do like how they chose to use hexagonal patterns for its spots. It really helps to lend it an air of artificiality and help to make it seem much more mechanical. The effect is another direct attacker, and somewhat makes sense if you think of the Giraffe's nexus allowing it a way to go over defense position monsters. In the end, a 5 out of 10. Lacking a good background, it's fine enough as it is, but there aren't really elements to carry it into that 6 out of 10 grade, so it's mostly just average. Their first extra deck monster is Wot Chimera, something that, once again, if you'll recall my Utopics review, fails to remember that a Chimera has in fact 3 heads, a lion's, goat's head on the front, and a snake head on the tail. The worst thing is, they clearly took some design elements from the goat, with the back half of the monster having cloven hooves, which seemed to indicate that they recognized a goat needed to evolve somehow, but just decided to make it the back half. In any case, there are quite a few things to like about the card. I like how they drew both the lion and the snake especially having the wires running through that showed up in a couple of other cards. The lion's head as well, and the mane in particular, have some amazing color work on them, and the gradient makes it look really cool and helps the entire card to pop out a lot, the mane being the thing that gives the lion so much of its presence. The wings are nice, almost looking like burnt gold as they fade into the background. One thing I'm not so much of a fan of is the blue and yellow stripes that make up the front of its body. I think it's just how they're designed, diagonally going across the body. It looks pretty bad in my opinion. The effect is fine, direct attacking seems to be somewhat of a theme for their bigger monsters. In the end though, despite some elements that I really like, this card can't get more than a 5 out of 10. Inconsistencies in the design of the monster along with some questionable choices in coloring make it about an average, close to a subpar card in my opinion. The next monster actually has an interesting story behind it, with the localization team in America choosing to translate the name as Wot Hydra, the Japanese name actually having a much more culturally interesting name. It's called Wot Kiramu, and makes a lot more sense than a Hydra, because a Kirimu, at least according to the Nyanga people of the Congo, is a monster with 7 dog-like heads with 7 eyes and 7 horns. I can see why it was localized to Hydra in the TCG. It fits a lot better with westernized mythology, the Hydra being one of the few monsters present that has multiple heads, but it is an imperfect translation. For one matter, the Hydra is supposed to have multiple reptilian heads, whereas the design for the monster in this case is much more canine. The design overall is pretty nice. The actual art is pretty amazing, with a crazy number of eyes with the monstrous mouths and the lightning bolts around the eyes adding a really cool touch. I like the bolts we can see in the jaws as well, indicating that despite their seemingly organic design, they are still mechanical to an extent. However, the effect is somewhat lacking if you consider it to be a Hydra, as I would have expected some sort of revival effect or multiple attacking effect to go along with its heads. This card gets a 6 out of 10 for its cultural relevance more than anything else, with a really cool name in the Japanese version and a really nice design according to that, which shows off a lot of creativity. If I was grading it solely on the Western version though, it would get a 4 out of 10. It lacks then a lot of the cultural impact that I would expect it to have, along with having an inconsistent design when one considers what a Hydra should actually look like. Wot Ki is their first spell, and it's basically fine. The clear body looks good, and I like the flair of having the lightning bolts around the handle, along with the electricity making up the actual teeth of the key. The design of having lightning seemingly contained inside of it, with it boiling out into the shape of the teeth, is a nice idea, and it's pretty good all things considered. The effect is also nice, this figuratively unlocking a majority of your plays by allowing your monsters to attack directly. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. It's a good enough card and lacks anything that would really disqualify it from getting a perfectly average grade. Moving on to the next card, I hope you'll forgive my obscenity, but what the fuck? This card is absolutely trash from an art perspective. It looks low quality, has no connection to the themes of the archetype, and while thankfully it does have a background this time, it's barely above nothing. The design is pathetic at matching the name, Wot Cube. It's boring. It makes no sense as why they would have it, merely being in a generic attack booster. While I initially thought that this might have been a support card included by accident, the same reason I'm not including Wot Kid, Wot Psychic Fighter, and Wot Tail Dragon, it came out in the Shining Darkness, the same set as cards like Wot Fox. I hate the design for many more reasons though. While it attempts to give itself more depth by adding in the vague outline of shapes inside the cubes, it serves no purpose in communicating anything about the card, and the visual effects are laughably poor. I would have expected this type of art from early Konami, when a pile of burning shit was apparently okay by them, not by a Konami who is perfectly able at producing excellent artwork. This card gets a 1 out of 10. This has almost no redeeming qualities altogether, and is a pathetic attempt at support for an archetype and thunder types in general. Wot Justment, on the other hand, is much better, moving back to the colorful style and cartoony aesthetic of the archetype. It resembles a hot glue gun, making sense that it's supposed to be adjusting monsters, or more accurately, their attack values. And there are a lot of things to like about it. The color, as I've mentioned before, is one of them. The bright yellows and pale blue standing out very well from each other, and the bright rainbow fluids dripping from the nozzle giving it a very kiddified look, matching with the relatively cartoony and innocent aesthetic of the rest of the archetype. This is altogether a decent card, the effect matching well with the art, even if it goes back to the disappointing background. It gets a 6 out of 10. Now before we go, can anyone tell me where they actually stuck that thing to adjust it? Because from what I've seen, it looks like it would go right up your ass. Well, you know what they say about vaccines and autism. Though being fair, that might just come from staring at this card for too long. What's Seen, their next card, while not disappointing as Wot Cube, is plenty underwhelming. The Wot monsters are characterized by their bright and vibrant color scheme along with their cartoony design, and this takes none of that into account. It seems to be a dead germ cell getting shocked by the eponymous What's Seen, but other than that, it lacks a lot of the personality that shines through in many of the other cards. The effect acts as a weird form of life drain, which makes no sense given that this is supposed to be a vaccine, a preventative measure rather than restorative medicine. It would have made much more sense to have this as some sort of stun effect, which would fit both the preventative aspect of the vaccine as well as the thunder nature of the card. This is not as bad as Wot Cube. The design itself, while being boring and uninspired, isn't actively terrible, so this card gets a 2 out of 10. Wot Castle is their field spell, and return once again to the colorful design and cartoony aesthetic that characterizes the rest of the archetype. It looks good, with plenty of exaggerated designs and wonky towers that list out at varying angles, giving it a very bouncy, cartoony feel. I like the small details of the card as well. The flags at the top of the towers being lightning bolts helps to keep everything in theme, and it generally looks really nice. I would have liked to see more protection-based effect to reflect the nature as a fortification somewhat, so in the end, this card gets a 4 out of 10. It's a good design, but it lacks an effect and background to make it any more interesting than it could have been. Wot Keeper is their first trap card and is pretty average. I like the idea of the card, the electric hand rising out of the box with a Wot shield on the back to grab a monster from the grave. It's executed competently, with a trail of electricity leading from the hand to the chest, and the hand itself dominating a massive portion of the card, emphasizing its power. I like the angle as well, seeming to be placed well above us as it descends into the graveyard to fetch a monster. Another pretty good card with some decent elements and a fitting effect, the name being a portmanteau of Wot and Gravekeeper, matching very well together with the effect. It gets a 5 out of 10. It's pretty good, all things considered, so in the end, it's just average. Wot Cannon is their next card, and is once again fairly typical. It looks like exactly what you'd expect of a cannon in the Wot aesthetic. The spring levers and little bells all seem to indicate a kidified version of the cannon, with the star-shaped barrel firing something out only seeming to emphasize that further. The effect works very well. Upon summoning a Wot monster, it allows you to burn the opponent. It makes a lot of thematic sense, and therefore it gets a 6 out of 10. Their last card, on the other hand, is Wot Cancel. What can I say about this one? There are two artworks for this card, the OCG version and the censored TCG version. I can safely say I prefer the OCG version, and not just because it shows Ojama Yellow getting the fucking electric chair, but it actually has some goddamn effort put into it. The TCG art is probably the laziest damn thing I've ever seen. Literal clip art picture of an X with a clip art picture of a lightning bolt through it. It doesn't look like a Yu-Gi-Oh card, it looks like a safety sign put up to show what happens if you try and stick your dick into an electrical socket. The TC version gets a 1 out of 10. This is just god-awful. They couldn't even think of anything remotely interesting to do with this. They couldn't even think of anything that would maybe show the fact that this was a Wot card that wanted to cancel out and stun your opponent. They couldn't even maybe make it a weird Wotified version of one of the Solemn cards, but no, they just decided, screw it, we'll put an X, we'll put a lightning bolt through it, and that deserves an early fucking lunch. This is disgraceful. The OCG one is much better. It has so much more personality as it shows a little yellow piece of The effect works nicely with the name, preventing the summon of other monsters in exchange for one of your own. In any case, the OCG art gets a 5 out of 10. While it has more personality, it still doesn't do anything to warrant more than the average grade, and looks only really good in comparison to the absolutely terrible TCG art. So that was Wot, a weird, strange archetype in general. While I really do appreciate how their design and their aesthetic is charming overall, they lack fundamentally in several aspects that I find really necessary for a good archetype. Their backgrounds are the biggest issue here, lacking any form of personality or adding anything to the cards overall. It's the exact same thing over and over and over again and lacks any sense of personality at all. The spell and trap lineup is another weakness, the cards varying wildly from decent for terrible. The card of the archetype for me has to be Wot Hydra. The design is by far the most interesting of the cards, and the thematic elements are genuinely excellent. I really hate to give this thing a low grade. I love so much of it. I love the fact that this was them trying to work outside the normal and trying to make a visually interesting and creative archetype that took some really interesting elements and took some really interesting designs and decided to do some cool things with them. But in the end, this can't get more than a 4 out of 10. It's a subpar archetype, despite some really good cards. So in the end, below average is all I can give it. Well, thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Please do respond as to whether you want me to continue with the alphabetical order of things or jump around so that I can respond to requests faster and I can generally keep up my interest a lot more. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please remember to comment, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. So without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out.